GDP. And what's important to think about is that also means that you've got a situation where the emerging world is growing very fast. That's a source of a lot of the growth. But most companies' current profits still remain in Western Europe and North America. So they've got to deal with this balance of issues. Rising wealth will add 1.3 billion consumers to our middle class going forward. And so if you think about those two factors, growth in world population is like adding 2 Germanys to the GDP. Rising wealth in consumer products is like adding another 1.5 U.S. Markets to what we're doing on GDP. But this is leading companies into this very difficult situation over the next 5 to 10 years, which is the way they think about North America and Western Europe is largely about a jobless recovery. So while the companies are healthy, they actually have very good balance sheets and cash flows now. They're getting good profits. I have not yet met a CEO of an established Global 1000 company that is adding jobs in North America and Western Europe. And we have to think about the implications of that for what's going on, a jobless recovery over the next 3 to 5 years. And in contrast, the way they talk about developed and emerging world is one of massive talent shortages. So you've got no jobs growth in the West, and you've got massive job shortages in the East. And the issue is, how are they going to lead it? And what's happened in business is for the past 2 decades, all the buzzwords have been around how do we create a single global operating model, how do we become one company. And now for the next decade, as Paul Walsh says from Diageo, we're dealing with an uneven world. We're dealing with companies that have to manage this issue of huge job pressure in Western Europe, North America. Some of their categories and products are going ex-growth, and then massive explosion on the other side. So this whole issue of kind of the implications, how do you find a new operating model to drive that? How do you think about almost 2 separate companies that are going on? How much fungibility of talent is there? So can all the jobs that are being lost in Western Europe and North America become the same people in the emerging markets? No. That's not what's happening, unfortunately. So the companies like to say, look, I know we're losing jobs in North America, Western Europe, but we're creating them elsewhere. Don't think the people are moving, because in only very rare occasions are they. But this is the interesting data about the uneven world. So as much as you hear about the rise of India, China, etc., they will only account for about 1/4 of the growth I'm talking about. North America still remains hugely important, and so these companies are going to have to deal with this division of how do I manage the U.S. now, how do I manage going forward. So, trend number 1, question number 1 is, what are going to be the new operating models for this kind of uneven, divided world? Trend 2 is the competition for finite resources, and this is what you hear everywhere now is a discussion about it. Some of the facts. The scramble is going to occur because we are growing and putting 1 billion people more on this planet. And people are rising up in terms of natural resources. The pinch points are going to be interesting. For example, what you've seen on the commodity spike in ore is ore demand has gone up 120%. And so you're going to end up in situations where there are competition from emerging economies for raw materials. I just got back from Mumbai yesterday. I was in Mumbai. One of the number 1 issues of Indian leaders there is, should we backward vertically integrate like the Chinese, because they're so fearful of losing access to ore, losing access to oil, etc. You've got this tension where the emerging markets with all their growth are trying to secure supply, and the owners of that supply are trying to keep it for national purposes. So that's going to be interesting. And it raises issues like what's happening with Chinese defense spending and some of the local insecurity that you're going to have there as people are battling for natural resources. And this, for a corporation, is going to mean there's a much higher level of insecurity around some of the commodities that they use, et cetera, et cetera. But it also raises a huge question, and just if you read the New York Times this morning or the International Herald Tribune this morning, Thomas Friedman was talking about it, which is, as we now face this situation where we know growth is coming and we don't have the resources for it, is there going to be, on one hand, what's called the big disruption, i.e. we're going to have to change everything about our economic model, capitalism is going to have to change, or is it going to be something like the Great Shift, which the other school of thought, which is technology will save us? And this debate is going to be the debate of this decade about what's going to happen with this dynamic of growth. Paul Polman, CEO of Unilever, says the companies now strategically have to decouple the notion of growth from the notion of using resources. I don't know if you know, but Unilever's ambition is to double their growth rate while having their environmental footprint. So a huge ambition to try to decouple it. And then you've got the issue of what's going to happen with energy resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as we go forward. The data says, just to kind of put this in perspective, if the entire world was to move to the current UK rates of consumption, we would need 3 planets of resources. If you move to the US rate of consumption, we would need 5 planets of resources. And that's what we're facing. And so if you think about mega trends, this growth followed by this issue of finite supply is going to be the issue of our time. And it gets into panic buying. So I just put headlines for the last week or two. You've got oil, you've got you've got rice, you've got anything you want to name. At some point is going to be in huge shortage of supply. So how are we going to address this as companies as we think about growth going forward? And that leads to another trend which I have seen and observed in the last 10 years, which is probably 10 years ago when you talked about this, business would say, what the hell is government going to do about it? What I see now is business just says, we're going to fix our patch. And it's a phenomenal difference in the attitudes that you have. And this is the notion of business taking responsibility. So business leaders increasingly now talk about how do I maintain accountability for my value chain. And I know that sounds like jargon, but what they mean is I've got raw materials, I've got production, I've got my manufacturing, and then my distribution and supply. Even though I might only own a bit of it, I need to actually be accountable for all of it. And so that's why Nike suddenly realized that they can't just use sweatshops and somehow say they didn't control the factory. They have to be responsible for the whole thing. And interestingly, it's usually starting off as employee-led. And what all CEOs who say that they've moved to take greater responsibility will say is the biggest impact they've had by far has been with the sense of mission and purpose from their own employees. They also recognize that to enhance and protect their corporate brands, this is an inevitability. And so you have Dove soaps that can't be a good brand as long as there's issues about palm oil and the orangutan. It just doesn't work, and they recognize that. Consumers' attitudes are mixed. Why? We're a bunch of hypocrites. And we all know that, which is if you ask any of us about responsibility, sustainability, all of us will absolutely say, yes, 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 we're for that. How often does it actually influence our purchase decision, and how often would we pay a premium for a responsible company? Much more mixed. And the CEOs that are leading this effort will say, it's good enough that I do it for my employees, because that matters to me, and if my consumers come along with it, that's great, but I'm not going to expect wonders. So that's why you have new measures coming up, like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which has now been about 13 years, measures, it matters, people care about it. And if you're a proponent of the Great Disruption, you would argue that business now is going to have to become a fundamentally different thing. So if you believe that all of this shortage, growth plus shortage equals a new way of doing business, they take heart in the view that somehow this is going to begin to make businesses be more transformational. And so again, I have lots of quotes, but you have people now finally coming out saying you cannot be a responsible leader of a business unless you're responsible for your value chain. You've got Adidas and thousands of others that are putting up their own green initiatives and laying out what they're going to be. And you also have an emerging sense that actually dealing with the issue of sustainability is actually critical to business. And what I've heard CEOs say around the world is if you set a mission to try to halve environmental consumption, it leads to some pretty interesting innovation. And so they're finding it's actually quite a good stimulus for their business. So how do you start to think about incorporating social responsibility? And is this a very good thing? Because business may now be a bit more mission-driven, purpose-driven as we think about things going forward. The other one is the issue of technology. And I'll try to bring technology to life in a second. But the facts are, we are in the middle of one of the most massive innovation exercises that we've seen. To give you one example, I have 3 teenage kids. 90% of what they spend their time on didn't exist 7 years ago. 90% of what they spend their time on. Another little fact, teenagers now ring doorbells with their thumb because that's what you use in all of these different games and innovation, not your forefinger. Pretty cool. New wave of technology, we haven't even started with it. So if you get people that are really talking about what's going to happen in the future, you get issues like genomics, you get issues like robotics, what's going to happen with nanotechnology, et cetera. And the fact is there is going to be huge disruptive innovation that are going to bring breakthroughs to what we're doing. And juiced by that, if you're on the big shift side, as I said at the beginning, you would believe that there's got to be solutions to every one of the trends I just talked about. It's just a technology issue and we'll solve it. For companies, it's interesting, though, because, and I'll show some examples, companies can disappear overnight because of technology disruption. And one of the things I go around the world talking to teams about is how much of your management time is spent fighting the future. And what I mean by that is how many companies sit around in boardrooms recognizing that there's a better proposition out there for their consumers, but they don't have it, and fighting the future and trying to fight against it. And so the issue with technology is for every Apple and the fundamental transformation that it's caused, you have a Kodak and Nokia. And that's what's going to happen in the future. And I'll just try to give some data, which is fun. So I have fun with this bit of data. No one else does, but I'll tell you anyway. To create the memory of an iPod using the supercomputer technology of the 1950s, which, by the way, made the hydrogen bomb, not bad, would take a supercomputer the size of Cyprus. Bring it a little bit closer to home. The memory of the computers used to do the Apollo 11 program, which involved 2 supercomputers in Houston and 2 onboard computers. The entire storage capacity to bring man to the moon equaled 1 song on an iPod. So the little iPod Shuffle, which is smaller now than a postage stamp, holds at least 100,000 moon missions. What does technology do? Well, there's just a couple stories. This is looking at a profit pool. So a profit pool on the horizontal axis looks at how revenue is distributed in an industry, and on the vertical axis looks at how much profit we're talking about. So the size of the boxes ends up being the amount of profit in an industry. This is looking at the US profit pool 1995 for photography. And guess what? Kodak was in a really sweet position. They basically owned and dominated every single bit of it. We all know digital came. Now, what do you think? Did the profit pool go up or down when digital came? Profit pool doubled. But watch what happened. That's Kodak's bit. That's the digital bit. And they lost all of their competitive advantage, all of their market share. And that sounds like an old story, and everybody kind of knows it. Look what happened just recently with Nokia. Nokia lost 70% of their profit pool between Q1 2008 and Q1 2009. 70% of their profits disappeared because their competitive set went from mobile phone players, which they understood and they could beat each and every time, to a bunch of these wackos coming in from Apple, from Android, etc. And even when you tell the story of Nokia's decline, the story started in 2007-8 with it was an Apple issue. And they lost because of Apple and the iPhone. And very quickly, when you were just finished telling that story, it became an Android story. And basically, Nokia had it all and lost it all with just technology and fighting the future. So how are these technologies both going to get us out of all our problems, create new waves of growth, and how, as companies, are you going to deal with these disruptive shifts that change business models overnight? The last is war for talent. Facts. Population aging in the West and China, as well as continued economic advancement in China and India, will result in a huge shortage of well-educated talent. So in India right now, if you remember a decade ago, the India story was this massive amount of talent, very cheap, you could use them for everything. Now the talent is completely shortage right now, very expensive relative to what it used to be. Brazil, massive talent shortage. I was just there in Brazil, and the big issue is they don't even have the educational infrastructure that India does to bring on the talent on board. And so you're having this huge issue about what's happening with talent. And then also you've got this issue of, can we create this mobile white-collar pool of talent that will go left from right? The fact of the matter is, again, I was just talking to a CEO in India who said, we didn't want to do it because we had a complete ban on expats, and now we brought in a bunch of mid-level managers from the Western economies to actually drive it. This may be good hope for some of the advanced managerial talent. It is not going to help labor in Western Europe or North America, and that's the big issue we're facing. And up to probably 2 years ago, all the expat trends were going the other way. People were trying to buy local talent, keep with local talent as they went going forward. Then the other issue, and I don't know if it's Z, Y, I don't know where we are now in the generations, but we have a big issue with how you actually motivate and deal with Generation Y. And for a lot of companies, what that means is they talk about a nobler mission, which is whatever we were doing before, profits and revenues ain't enough to attract the people that we need to have. And we need a nobler mission in how they think about it and how you bring that generation on. The other issue with that generation is the question of loyalty. And companies like to bitch and moan about this and say these young people aren't loyal anymore. But then if you turn around and look at the company proposition to them, there's zero loyalty.
James.
Done.
Good.
Good, okay.
I think we could listen to him totally. It's not only war of talents, James. I'm sorry I have to cut you short here. It's also war of time, because also we've got other guests who would like to definitely debate exactly on what you've been presenting. And thank you so much for now. So I think big thank you to James Allen. Sorry to cut you short like this. There's more. There is more to come. And when James gets rolling, he definitely is rolling. So thanks very much indeed. Very quick question before I actually introduce the rest of my panel. These 5 global key drivers, to whom were they totally new? Raise your hands, just very quickly. Who thought they were totally new? Who thought, yeah, I've heard about them already? Raise your hands. Okay. Good. And that's really interesting. Even though these drivers, these key drivers, have been around for some time, they're still going to be a big issue because the consolidation, it seems, between drivers and the fundamentals in a business are just not working right yet. Okay, let me get to the rest of the panel. First of all, we've got a guest coming up from far, far away via teleconferencing, Muhtar Kent. He comes straight from Atlanta, and I hope he will appear there. He is. Muhtar Kent, he's chairman and CEO of the Coca-Cola Company, of course. We only see your tie, but now there he is. Hi, Muhtar. Thanks very much for being with us. And we are also joined by Anthony Jenkins. He's chief executive of Barclays Retail and Business Banking. Please take a seat. Then we have Gina Chow, member of the Executive Committee and Senior Vice President, Corporate Strategy, Lenovo Group. And then Jérôme Tolot, last but certainly not least, Executive Vice President at GDF Suez. And if I may remind you, the balloon system, I'm not familiar with it, so I'm still working on it, but I know you've been doing it all day, and it has been a great response. So please keep it going, because one thing for sure, I think your added value to come to these conferences is to have this fantastic direct access to all of our panelists and experts on the individual issues. So please just keep them going. I see them here, and I will definitely pass them on. But first of all, let me get to our furthest guest away. Muhtar, thanks very much for making the time and join us. You heard what James Allen just had to say about the 5 key drivers. Give us a quick feedback on what actually strikes a chord with you right now. He's gone?
And am I gone?
No, you're not.
Thank you. It's good to be here and joining you. I think it's a very timely and interesting conference, and you know what? When I heard James, I think it kind of reminded me of a meeting that I had with all my senior leadership about 3 years ago, just to bring everyone together around the world with all our partners, and to try and determine the trends for the next 10 years and create a vision for our business, for our company, for our system for 2020. And everything that I heard was very similar to some of the discussions that we had there. In fact, I see Dominique Renich sitting in the audience there, our president for Coca-Cola Europe, our largest group in terms of business for us. And she was there at that meeting too. So, you know, we based that vision, first ever shared vision of our for the world for the next 10 years on very similar trends. Billion new middle-class consumers. James said 1.3 billion. It's even better for us. We sort of were a little more conservative. Said 1 billion new middle-class consumers coming in. However the macro dynamics are. However you slice and dice it, 1 billion new middle-class consumers, 1 billion new urbanized consumers coming in. So, you know, that's creating, in a way, urbanization at a rate that we've never seen in the world before to happen in the next 10 years, between 2010 and 2020. And that's, in a way, creating a city the size of New York in the world every 3 months.
Well, Muta, absolutely, I think this is absolutely great. And let me just interject there. If it was only New Yorkers, though, coming in to the picture, there you are, coming into the picture, that is one thing. The other thing is, of course, we are talking global growth. We're talking about Asian growth. So how do you actually cater for exactly their demands?
Again, just to continue, most of these, most of the urbanization, a high percent of the middle class coming in from emerging markets, and the urbanomics are profound because the world is already majority urban today, and in the next, when you create it in the next 24 hours, another 180,000 people around the world that will come into the cities every 24 hours. That's basically looking at a situation where 100 cities account for, today already 30% of the world GDP and almost all of its innovation. Almost all of the innovation coming from those 100 cities in the world. And again, many more cities coming in. Then also the shift in the world. So from a single dominating economy in the world, like the United States, shift taking place where Brazil, Russia, India, China for sure, but also countries like Indonesia, Turkey, Mexico, many others, sharing the sort of spotlight of the world. And then another trend we saw was huge engaged youth generation, empowered like never before, and also at the same time, simultaneous to that incredible rise of that youth generation, the most affluent and the most mobile over 40 population the world has ever known, happening in this decade, 2010 to 2020. And another important movement in this regard is the growing economic empowerment of women around the world that we saw, built into our vision and trends. And this will have, in our opinion, again, a huge implication for all of us. Women now, today, control $20 trillion in spending in the world. That put that into context, that's an economic impact larger than the US, larger than China and India, all combined. And today around the world, 1 in 11 working age women is involved in entrepreneurship. So that's, again, not 1 in 11 is not a great ratio, but there is a huge change taking place in the world. And the highest percent of women business owners, actually, which is counterintuitive, highest today percent of women business owners are in markets that you might not expect. For instance, nearly 20% of working women in Thailand are entrepreneurs. In India, it's 14%. In Mexico and Chile, it's 10%. Brazil, it's 12%. And these percentages are rising at phenomenal rates all the time. So, when you look at all this, that's how we sort of built into our vision of doubling our business in the decade 2010 to 2020. In other words, we're a business where we celebrated our 125th anniversary this year in May.
Yes.
So the vision that we set ourselves for was to create what we created in 125 years in the next 10 years. All because of what we see as essentially positive, very positive developments for our business. Because
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, we are, what we provide is very simple. We provide moments of refreshment and moments of happiness, bringing people together more than a billion times every day.
Enjoy. Muta. You're definitely adding a lot. Let me just quickly go through also the other panelists before we're starting to go a little bit more in depth of the enjoyment of drinking a good can of Coca-Cola. Definitely. Jérôme, of course. There you go. Okay, Jérôme, of course, Muta just mentioned this. He referred to the next billion consumers. And adjacent to that, of course, this kind of amount of people need to be catered for in terms of energy. They are also big waste producers on one hand. On the other hand, you really have to build up an enormous amount of infrastructure and do that in the most sustainable way. It seems it's a real juxtaposition. So on one hand, you have the need for something which is polluting our planet. On the other hand, you need to still have a sustainable kind of business model in order to cater for it long term. So what is your actual reaction here?
Well, of course, I completely agree with, I don't remember his name, but Smutar. And I can say to Mutar that we provide energy to Coca-Cola, so we are very happy with the Coca-Cola expansion. But I would like to say that out of the 5 mega trends that have been presented, I would like to take maybe 3 which are very important for us. The first one is the growth of emerging market. You have to know that 80% of the growth in consumption, energy consumption, will be done in the emerging markets. So for a group like GDF Suez, which is the leader in energy, in energy in the world, it's very important to move from the west part of the world to the emerging market. So that's very important. And I will maybe elaborate a little bit more further. We do believe, and it was a question, we do believe that we have to adapt our business model. And in order to adapt our business model, we just signed a very important partnership with CIC, with a big Chinese investment fund, which will be our partner in a lot of countries in the world, which that's very important for us. In water, we did the same. We partnership now with a big Hong Kong group, which is important in order to develop our business in Asia. So we are modifying our business model. So far, we were acting on our own, in Europe and in the States, but now we are partnering with some big, very big group outside of Europe. The second very important key driver for us is, of course, I would say, social responsibility. Mm-hmm. We have more than 200,000 people in more than 30 countries in the world. And as you know, water, waste, and energy are I would say, public goods. And so we're obliged to be very active from this social, with this social issue. So what do? We develop a lot of initiatives in order to be very active in the countries where we develop our business. We have a foundation, of course. We are very, I would say, very active with big NOG in the world. We have some specific, investment fund which invest in poor countries, which give access to energy to a lot of people. So we are very keen to be partner of the countries where we work.
But you
and we think that's very important for us.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting that you are going through a transition of where corporate social responsibility is not greenwashing anymore. Has that been a big struggle? Are you still facing that people come up to you, you're still producing a lot of dirty energy, you're just greenwashing, and it is not part of your base strategy?
No, less and less now. Mm-hmm. If you take, for example, our waste business, we do work a lot now on recycling. That's very important. If you take our water business, we do work also to reuse the water. So we are very active in order to preserve the environment and, of course, to associate our employees to this development. And the third element, which is very important for us, is the war for talent. Mm. I said that we employ more than 200,000 people in the world. That's very important. So far, we have a very low turnover. 3% per year, which is not a lot. But as we are developing our business in emerging countries, we do expect that this turnover may increase if we don't take the appropriate actions. And to take the appropriate action is to give the same chance to these local people compared to your European employees. We have created a university, which is very important now, and so we train a lot of these people. We give them a hope to make a career in our group, which is not so easy because the speaker said it's important and it's difficult, of course, for people like us, for our jobs, of course, because we are developing our business outside of Europe, but we are obliged to associate all these local managers. And
sure,
maybe
it's a cultural sensitivity
issue.
Yeah,
but that's not easy, but we are working very hard on that. That's very important. So yes, there's a lot of things happening. We are modifying our business model. We are more and more involved in local communities, and we have this big challenge to take people from emerging countries in our organizations.
Yes.
That's not easy.
It is not easy.
But,
and I think the last point you mentioned is actually something that is tremendously important also to Lenovo. Before we get onto the war of talent issue, Gina, if you want to take your microphone, let me ask you, so what do you think about these 5 key drivers that James presented? Lenovo totally aligned with them? Is this part of your basic business structure already?
Yes, I think Lenovo is developed from developing country from China. I'm Chinese, so I want to comment on the 5th driver about the war for talent. So, and Jerome also mentioned about the talent in emerging market, that the turnover rate is very high. And also James mentioned in China, in India, they are lack of well-educated talents. That's true. And this is one reason why we can find that in the world, most of the multinational companies come from US, come from Europe. Just a few of companies, global companies come from China, come from India. I think that lack of talent is one reason. Because 10 years ago, Lenovo decided to become a global company. At that time, Lenovo was just focused on China. And then we find it's hard for a Chinese company become a global company. Yep. And then we decided 2005, we bought IBM PC division. And we merged together. So today, Lenovo is merged the Legacy Lenovo and the IBM PC together.
That is a very, very interesting experience. So they have a traditional local champion, Chinese champion, Lenovo, being absolutely number one in China when it comes to PCs and their technology, buying IBM PC, a totally American company. So I wonder, you couldn't get more different corporate cultures than that. Okay, you got a global company from that. Yeah. However, to consolidate, that must have been a nightmare.
Yeah. I think all the merger and acquisition is very hard because from the survey, 70% of merger and acquisition will fail. So, and especially for traditional Chinese company, Lenovo, and not traditional, just America-centric IBM company, it was hard for two companies merged together. But we find we can leverage our branding, we can leverage our customer, we can leverage our market. But it was very hard to integrate people, integrate the culture, and integrate the whole management system. That was hard. I remember during the first several meetings, and the meeting and America like to talk, like to contribute their idea. But the Chinese was tend to quite think. So the meeting was very difficult to exchange an idea.
Letters, yeah. Traditional way.
Yes, and that time the Chinese lack of English language skill, it was very tough. It's tough to build a trust relationship. Then we find that we have to do something differently. We established East and Mist cultural integration program. We assign some Chinese from Beijing, from China to U.S. I'm the example because 6 years ago I couldn't speak any English. Then company signed me to the U.S. I live in New York for 1 year, Singapore for another year, and now I live in North Carolina in U.S. for 4 years. So now I just learn how to say the language and how to know the culture, and so I just feel now so confident to manage the company. And we learn the different culture. We need different people style. So that makes our company different. So this, I think in the beginning, we are weak at Thailand, but now we find, just because of that, we find the diversity talent from the world. We not just find talent from China, from the US, but also from European. And today, in our top leadership team, 100 people, they are come from 14 countries.
Yes,
so
I mean, that's globally.
Yes, this
totally,
is
totally global.
Yes.
But I think what the key message is here, that communication at the end of the day is the key, and you have to have a common language in order to understand the differences and then find common ground and then make a company efficient and continue to grow wherever you are a player in the world. Now, let's move over also to Anthony Jenkins coming through from Barclays. And I think at the moment the banks in general have a rough time. I mean, it started quite some time ago, so really good that you are here and also answering questions also from the balloons coming in already. I didn't have to do all this work drawing up my questions because you're super active, so thank you. And we'll get to your questions in a moment. Anthony, of course, volatility in the markets. That is something that, now, James didn't actually really allude to, perhaps when he was saying technological innovation, the velocity of it is something that we really have to fight with. But volatility in general is not just in innovation, but especially in the financial markets. And that is something that really drives credibility or the loss of confidence. How are you seeing your world right now, and where do you put these 5 key drivers?
So I broadly buy the drivers. I think they're right. But if you think about the drivers and you think about the volatility they create, it's easy to be quite, I think, concerned about the future of the world for this reason. Most of the trends have profound long-term implications for the world. But to address those trends requires short-term sacrifice. So I kind of buy the big disruption theory because I do think we need a better version of capitalism. I think recent events have shown that capitalism, while good, needs to be better, and that's true of banking as well as other aspects of capitalism. I also buy the big shift because I am largely positive about how technology can help solve the problems created by the big disruption. But I think there's a third big here, and I would describe that as big leadership. Because leadership in the corporate world, in the political world, and in civil society needs to move from being essentially short-term focused. This opinion poll, this electoral cycle, this quarter's profits, this half year's profits, this year's profits, to thinking much longer term about the problems that these trends will create and the opportunities and how we're going to respond to them. And so I think the challenge for all of us in this room and in other gatherings like this is to think about how we can appropriately reflect volatility in both the short and the long term and balance between the inevitable trade-offs that you have to make in the short term for the future. Energy and so on is a great example of that, but there are lots of other examples that we can think of that are happening right now in the Eurozone, for example, in the US, where we need to take a much longer-term perspective than we're taking.
Anthony, I thought sustainability has been around for quite some time, and especially, corporate governance. We had Enron falling down, and all of a sudden we had all these rules and regulations and transparency coming through. I mean, this is quite a few years ago now, so it should have been here, 2007, 8, should have been avoided, and what we're seeing right now should have been avoided as well. I mean, any company that is listed on the stock market, and Muta, you know that as well, I guess, in general, has the pressure to create shareholder value, to create value every 3 months, and you are up against these short-term pushes also from the markets, because if you don't perform, your stock goes down. If your stock goes down, hell is loose. To try to be sustainable on long term, and how do you actually manage that bridge?
So I did another panel with Paul Polman from Unilever, and Paul and I talked about it, so I don't think he'll mind me saying this. He got up and said, I don't work for the shareholder, I work for the customer and society.
Yeah.
Which is very laudable, but we all know that if his stock price tanks, he won't be working for anybody, right?
Yeah,
so, for me, this is not about one thing or the other. Yeah. It's about and in our business, what we think about, like a lot of companies, is a much broader concept than corporate social responsibility. We think about each of the stakeholder groups we have to serve: our customers, broader society, our shareholders, and our colleagues. We think about what we have to deliver for them in the short term and in the long term. And it's not easy, because solving for one thing, short-term profitability, is hard enough. Solving for kind of 8 things in a 3-dimensional type of way is really complex. But my view is that truly sustainable businesses like Barclays that have been around for 300 years, we've been around for 300 years.
Trying to stay around for 600 years.
So we want to stay around for 600 years, right? We will only do that if we can master the art of this. Because if we continue to take a short-term view, I'm speaking now about Barclays, but it's true about other institutions, we won't be around for the next 10 years.
Muta, we've got the first balloon question coming in. I'm not sure how familiar you are, but here we have the great opportunity for the audience to get direct access to you via all the technological gadgets, and gone here is on my screens, but never mind. There's an interesting one, and I want to pose that to you, Muta, simply because you are in that kind of business where CSR, you wouldn't expect, needs to be big as well. We have one of our audience asking, what trends do you actually expect in health and obesity over the next 10 years? Now, of course, there is Coke, and then there's Diet Coke, and then there is Coke Zero, and then there is mineral water. However, you've got 500 products, and a lot of them, of course, perhaps may add to an obesity crisis. How would you respond to that?
I think, talking broadly, we have an absolute intention, plan, strategy to be part of the solution for this notion of obesity, of non-communicable diseases, whatever you term it. Because I think the world, as it's got affluent, has also adopted, our whole consumer base has adopted certain habits. If you take the average sort of teenager, even a young person at the age of 20 to 30, the number of steps, particularly in the Western world, have gone down per day from 3,000 to 1,000. We just move less. We just exercise less. And I think we see ourselves as having an absolute responsibility as a company that is invited into the lives of consumers 1.7 billion times every day. In other words, consumers invite our 500 brands, 3,000 products into their lives 1.7 billion times a day. And we see ourselves as having an absolute responsibility to create more awareness about energy balance, create much more transparency, understanding of calories in and calories out. And there is a lack of understanding in the world. That's why we also are working with government and with civil society in every one of the 206 countries that we operate, that we own factories in, that we have a business in 206 countries, to have active, healthy lifestyle programs.
Okay.
And we see that this is something that what I call the golden triangle has to embrace. The golden triangle is government, business, and civil society. We cannot embrace that alone because we won't be successful. Government can't do it alone, and neither can civil society, NGOs. We have to work together in a much more collaborative sense with government and civil society as business to address this issue, to create awareness, and we have to do some things proactively. Like what we did is front-of-pack labeling, voluntary front-of-pack labeling, to ensure that we bring the amount of calories that every one of our beverages have or doesn't have in the front of the pack. It used to be in a little place in the back of a pack you couldn't see. You've got to be much more proactive in the way that you talk to consumers today, because consumers do not want just to be talked to. They want to have a two-way dialogue.
Muta,
and that's
exactly
what it's all about.
Exactly. I like that keyword, the mutual conversation, because I think you've got about 30 or 33 million followers on Facebook. Now, innovation and technology, James Allen was referring to as well, which are disruptive, are changing the way we are communicating, and we're experiencing it today with the balloon system. Social media, how much of a part does that actually need to be in future in terms of the way you communicate and structure your business? I mean, you seem to be totally integrating this, Muta.
Well, you know, about, say, 7, 8 years ago, even 5 years ago, probably not more than 2% of our total media spend would go into social media. Today, it's much more than 20%. It's growing, it's rising, for the simple reason, again, we as a marketing business, as a marketing company, as a brand business, having $15 billion brands, not just Coca-Cola, but another 14 brands that are more than $1 billion in our portfolio, see that we have to move from, in the past, creating consumer impressions to consumer expressions. And that is both the world of consumers, but even our own employee base, 770,000 employees around the world of Coca-Cola, of the Coca-Cola system, all want to have a positive impression about the character of our business, not just about how good our products taste, but about the character of the business that produces those, that owns those brands, that produces those brands. And that's why it's so important to have that positive consumer expressions created. And social media is a great way to create those, because it's in social media that people can communicate between themselves about your business, about your brands, talk about your brands. And that's why sustainability is such a key component of our vision, because we know we cannot get to our 2020 vision of doubling our business in 10 years unless sustainability is embedded into our business. That's why I'm drinking this water from this bottle that is made partially out of plants.
Yes.
For the first time in the world of beverages, you can have a bottle that actually is made out of plants. And see, the key in the world today, and I think Anthony mentioned it, all of us have to crack the code for growth, however difficult that may be. Crack the algebra for growth. And that can come only if you can successfully convert waste to resource. So 30% of this bottle now is made out of sugarcane molasses. It's not sugarcane, which is not waste. It's molasses is the waste of sugarcane once sugar is made in plants. Take that, create resin, and make a bottle. And that's good for... So therefore, as you do good, though, as you're doing something good, you actually do well, because the cost of this is going to be less than the cost of
it's going to be even more cost effective.
Fossil fuel resin.
Absolutely. Now, I wonder about this kind of little mini mega trend that seems to be appearing, James. And let me get you back into the conversation. You still have your mic, isn't that right? With regards to social media, it seems that, we at CNBC, we are all over Twitter. We use the social media a lot. It seems to be very much working, and I think a lot of the people here are either on LinkedIn or on Xing or Facebook. Is that a mega trend that you are starting to really now, or will it be a mega trend? Is that a trend you're starting to see is needing to be taken more seriously? A quick answer, please.
It is a mega trend that's happening, and the businessman said it best, which is that every company now has to think through their social media strategy and has to be a critical part of what they do. One of the big issues is simply the more corporates try to own it, the kids will run, and they'll run fast, and that's an issue that everybody's going to have to figure out.
What do you mean by that? Yes,
I couldn't agree with James more. What he's trying to say, I think, is that you cannot be seen to be controlling everything out there that is being discussed, and even on your Facebook page. Our Facebook page was not created by us. It was created by two consumers in Los Angeles. I think that's what he's trying to say, which I totally agree with him.
Okay.
So I want to share my feeling, because James talked about the Generation Y. I think the Generation Y live in the social media environment. So this is why when we consider our product, consider our company, we have to think about the social media. About myself, in the beginning, I just share my personal story, my photo. But now I find it's a good opportunity to dialogue with my employee and dialogue with my customer. Now, I have 1 million followers today. So easy for me to publish some news and to get some comments. I just feel I enjoy the life for the social media life. And so it's good too. Yeah.
Anthony.
Just a small story. In my office on my bookshelf, I have a constant feed of all the tweets in the world about Barclays that are coming through. And that's quite interesting because we actually had to bring our corporate firewall down so we didn't edit the language because some of the tweets aren't that complimentary about us. I was in my office one day and I looked over and people were tweeting that our online banking system was very slow. So I phoned up our technology people. I said, is there a problem with online banking? They said, we don't think so. But they went to check, and there was, because it happened to be the end of a month, and the volume was 4 times what we would normally expect. So you cannot control this. So therefore you have to learn how to use it and channel it for the benefit of the business. But I would also say that I would see it as a strand, if you like, in the broader technology trend that James talked about, because I think when you combine it with the proliferation of smartphones, the always-on, geographically present social media, you put all those things together and you have something that's very powerful, and that shifts the center of gravity in the relationship to the consumer. You saw it in the Arab Spring, you saw it in the UK with the riots we had there. Look at what happened to Netflix in the United States. What's going to happen to companies like RIM? You put Nokia up there. I mean, personally, I think RIM could be on your slide in a year's time, and they're, what, a decade old? Yeah. So, this thing is just accelerating, and as business, we must avoid what we want always to do in business, which is to control. But we have to ride the wave, not try and control the wave.
You're disagreeing, Jean?
I, of course, agree with what has been said. I would like to say that it is linked to 2 mega trends. The first one, when you go global, when you move from the west part to the emerging countries, you need to have social network because it's a very good way to communicate. I was in China last week. I have been very happy because my Chinese employees said to me, hey, I communicate with somebody of Brazil in order to have an expertise in cooling district network. So it is very useful. And if you want to be global, you need to develop social network. And it is also linked to the issue of social responsibility. If you want to take part of the local communities, if you want to be involved in NOG and everything, you need to have a way of communicate. So that's very, very important. And I think that the 3 mega trends are completely linked. This social network, this growth of emerging countries, and of course this issue of social responsibility. And I have one example to give. We decided, it was 1 year ago, to create a network, internal network, in order to share expertise. So of course, it's very trivial, I would say very simple. 2 months after the opening, 2,000 of our executives were already using this social network. So it's going very, very fast. And young employees do like that. We can't be, I would say, a big company if we don't develop social network.
Well, they were growing up like this.
And they will do that. And we do that.
Exactly.
If we don't do that, our employees will do that.
Yeah.
For sure.
But I would like to pick up on something that Anthony has said, and I wonder how the room is feeling about this, the pros and the cons of social media. On one hand, it is great because people can communicate. On the other hand, don't you think that in some way democracy now perhaps gets a little bit of a different shape, turn to it, simply because people can now not only communicate, but they can organize themselves, they can really take action, coordinated action wherever they sit, be it in Sydney, in New York, in Shanghai, in Frankfurt, and can actually make a global movement real, be it against a company, be it against Wall Street, be it against a government. So in what sort of way can a corporation really safeguard itself, influence without seeming to be influential, overpowering, as in trying to own it, and really strike a balance? Do you see there's a big shift there?
I think it is a big shift, and I think it's about actually, again, I see it as a positive trend. I think it's overwhelmingly positive. Like all things in life, there is a tendency for it to be used for nefarious purposes, but by and large, I think it's overall positive, and I think it's positive for democracy also, because the velocity of communication increases, and the velocity of feedback increases. If you go back to what I said before about a better version of capitalism, I think part of that is understanding what your stakeholders are wanting in a much more profound way, and so social media helps with all of that. But again, the big mistake is, you know, let's just put 25 people out there who'll tweet positive things about the company, because that will, people will see through that in a nanosecond, right? It's the authenticity. What I love about this Twitter wall I have in my office is people are tweety all the time. I had a great experience. I'm really fed up. I'm stuck in the branch queue for 10 minutes. You know, that you can't buy that kind of research, right? It doesn't matter how much research. You just have to look at that screen for 5 minutes and you can get the pulse of what's going on in the organization. So I think broadly it's positive, but like all of these things, you've got to use that real-time insight and then do something with it.
Okay, let's get back to the questions from the audience, because that's what we're here for. One of the questions I learned, with largely female audience in front of you, what are your thoughts on how we engage and harness the power in this room to best address these issues? Now, these are female power ladies that say we are influential within our corporation, so how can we actually really make a difference? Who would like to take that one on from the panel?
I'd like to start, if I may. Just, you know, I think in terms of the next 10 years and beyond, businesses, small, medium-sized, or large, unless they can harness the power of women leadership and in a very meaningful way, I think they're going to be absolutely left behind the curve. When I sort of came back from running Asia and became the chief operating officer back 5 years ago into the business, first thing, 70% of all shoppers for Coca-Cola in the world are women. And we saw that there was a complete disconnect with the amount of women leadership we had in the business. And so first we had to fix inside the company. And we went around and created a Women Leadership Council, which I chaired, still do. And the purpose of that was to both ensure that the pipeline was very strong for women leaders at incoming in, but also at middle level and higher level. And we've gained a lot of traction. Percentages have gone up. We're nowhere where we need to be, but we're on the right trend. Then we said, as a consumer business, we also have a responsibility to create women empowerment outside of the company. So last year at the Clinton Global Initiative in New York, I made a commitment that we would empower another 5 million more women by 2020 around the world. 5 by 20 is the name of that initiative. And we do that through both creating and ensuring women retailers around the world are successful. We train them, bring microcredit to them, and bring down the barriers for women entrepreneurship across the world, mostly in emerging markets across the world. And you'd say 5 million is a big number. Yes, it is, but we feel that it can be done in terms of empowering 5 million more women through the work of our business, through the work of our partners, through the work of our distribution network.
Okay, so it is something that also needs to be harnessed by the structure of a corporation where these women are operating. I think this is quite an interesting message. Anthony.
So if you accept the idea that we need big leadership as part of this whole better capitalism, then I think big leadership has got to be diverse leadership. All the research shows that diverse teams get better answers than homogenous teams. And for me, it's all about how can we path women through the course of the organization and get them into significant leadership roles more quickly. It is changing. It's changing slower than it needs to change. In some of the large businesses that are within Barclays, 35% of our senior leadership is female. It needs to be higher than that if we're going to address the problems of the world. And that is all about, I think, identifying talent early, nurturing, grooming that talent, mentoring that talent, and creating more pipeline so that we get more women into these very senior roles. But we will not be able to reinvent capitalism without diverse leadership.
Okay, Gina.
So as a woman, I emphasize...
Powerful woman.
Yes, as a woman. So at Lenovo, because we are an IT company, so in the market there's just less of engineer women. But in Lenovo, we still say the target, how many women should be our leadership team. We have a percentage target. And at all Lenovo, we also design a program called the WELL program, means women in Lenovo leadership team. So, and all executive will support this program. We have a quarterly training, we have a best practice sharing, and when our CEO and the leadership team visit the different countries, we have dialogue with the WELL group. So we just want to develop a new generation and a women leadership team, so diversify our leadership team. So.
Yes, you also have
of course
big
agree.
targets there.
I agree, but we have had a debate in GDS about the way to do that, to achieve this promotion of women. And we decided to fix some precise target. Some of us were against targets, others were for targets, and we decided to adopt some targets. And one of these targets is that it's 30% of total, I would say, executive recruitment should be women. The same for the promotion. We decided also to adopt a precise target, and not only a target, but a time schedule, because you can fix a target and you can wait for 30 years. So we have precise target in GDS and precise time schedule. And I would say, and I will be brief, that you have also to show that you do what you say. So what did we do? We appoint the finance manager of GDFCS Group is a lady. She has been appointed 1 month ago.
French.
45 years old. After that, we change our HR manager. We appoint a lady, 50 years old. It's a little bit too far. We also decided to change our procurement organization. We appoint a lady. We also, and you saw I can go on, we also, don't be a man in GDFCS now. We also decided to change our IT organization. We appoint a lady.
Yes.
So if you take the COMEX of GDFCS, all the recent appointment, all the recent change have been made in order to allow ladies to join the COMEX. So not only you have target, time schedule, but also decision.
No,
you have to do.
Yes,
do it.
You do have to
and not to talk.
And I think it is interesting because the next question is kind of asking in another way what I would like to say. Is one thing a company having targets. The other thing, companies having targets and actually acting on it. The other thing is to have an infrastructure that allow women in business, especially women that are always gone, to have families. You know, and this is exactly what the next question is. Where is it? Do they want us there? Do the megatrends require aspiring women access to be internationally mobile, to command senior leadership positions? And do they want this? I.e., if you're a woman, you want to have a career. These days we live in a global world, so you need to move left, right, and center. What do you do with your child? What do you do with your husband that you hardly ever see? I mean, of course, at some point it becomes a choice, but I think how flexible the work environment is must play very much into the possibility of nurturing that talent that you were mentioning early on. Anthony.
So last week we had a event across Barclays, which is part of Women of the Year. This is an internal event that recognises women inside Barclays who have done great work. And one of my colleagues, the head of procurement for Barclays globally, was talking about this very topic. And she was talking about her own experiences, and she said it extremely well. I'm going to quote her because she said it better than I ever could. She said, "You can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time."
Mm-hmm.
And she went on to describe some of the trade-offs that she'd made in her professional life and how her husband had sort of taken the lead with his career sometimes, and she had others, and they'd shared child raising and so on. I think the fundamental issue here is that we have to recognise, firstly, this issue that we need diverse workforces, not just by gender, but in general. Secondarily, that we're all going to work longer. So we're all going to work longer. So this is an issue where people, not just women, will want to come in and out of the workforce at different intensities. And as big companies, we need to get on the right side of this issue. I think, candidly, we haven't done as good a job as we could at Barclays. We need to do more to provide the sort of flexibility that says, you're a high flyer, maybe you want to go laterally for a while, and then you can pick up again being a high flyer, and then maybe you go laterally again. Maybe you take that job if you're working in the UK, maybe you take that job in Hong Kong, or maybe you don't. And if you don't take it this time, it doesn't mean you won't be offered it the next time. And this is partly about process, and it's partly about culture, but it's about the organisation. I think is a very fair point. You've got to say and do in order to create these opportunities. I'm pleased that we have colleagues in Barclays who have been able to achieve that, but of course we'd like to have many more. So I think, again, going back to this notion of big leadership, companies need to think much more broadly and deeply on the topic, and then put the programs in place.
Yeah, I would like to put that question basically also to the audience. Away from the balloon, how many of the female employees here, business women, actually feel real support from the companies they work for to strike a balance whereby they can have a career but at the same time also produce the next generation? How many? Just raise your hands. Okay, that's quite a few. We are in France, where you get a crash, I think, after 10 days. Good, okay. And how many don't? Okay. All right, good. So it seems to be quite balanced here. Next one. I'm going to now, we are jumping a little bit issues here because I really want to give you the opportunity to get the questions to our panelists. So the next question here is, coming back to social media, it seems to be on people's forefront. What room is there actually to incorporate social media in companies and education if there are employees out there that say that there's no access to Twitter or Facebook, that basically there's something that you're not to be able to do whilst you're working? Well, you just do it hiding. No, honestly.
I don't want to...
I think it's a valid question.
It is a valid question.
On one hand, it is a big tool. On the other hand, when are you supposed to do it? Is it just another thing you tag on after you've worked your long hours and you do it in your free time?
So I don't want to just hog the conversation, but it took a great deal of effort to put the Twitter feed in my office, right? We went recently to see an organisation called the Bromfield Housing Association. They're one of the largest providers of social housing in the UK, and they're recognised as being a leader in their category. And they have been through exactly this issue. And now they've said, we just open everything up. Facebook, Twitter. The only thing they don't let their colleagues have access to is YouTube, and that's only because of the bandwidth that's required. Yeah. And they said, look, we trust our colleagues, right? If you use Twitter inappropriately, that's a disciplinary thing, and there'll be consequences to that. But basically, we trust our colleagues. We all came away from that thinking, that's a really interesting approach. Maybe we ought to try that and see if it works. Now, we have almost 100,000 people working in the part of Barclays I'm responsible for, so it's a bit different from the 2,000 or 3,000 they have. But even still, again, you can't control this, and you can't... So if you're going to get on the right side of it, you've got to be able to open these things up. Take a bit of risk. Take a bit of risk, because at the end of the day, it comes down to an individual management decision if an employee, abuses the situation.
Of course.
If I may just... sorry.
Of course, just a second. Of course, I agree on what has been said. You can't say that you want to install a kind of democracy or kind of discussion in your organization and to be too strict. So in my mind, it's a question of education, It will take time. You have to explain to people how to use all this new media. But I'm sure that you can't forbid them. If you do that, you will not succeed. And they will do, in a hidden time.
You do it anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like with children.
So it's better to educate, to talk about that, and to have an open discussion, I think, on that.
Muta.
Just quickly to add, I think this whole concept of social media, but social networks, virtual worlds, I think do provide tremendous, opportunities for us also, linked to the previous question, also provide flexibility because when you extrapolate this over the next 10 years, we're probably all going to need all the bricks and mortars that we use today, much less. Today we're in a transition. We're still in the bricks and mortars, and we're increasingly using all these new tools. We haven't yet shed all the other unnecessary things that are going to be unnecessary if you extrapolate this a few years on. So, but then, what consequences does that have also for the women leadership because of the family restrictions and so forth? In the past, you would have offices around the world, and you'd send you send people all around as expatriates, and they have to live in a certain country for a while, and that obviously causes some family issues and restrictions. We won't have any of that because we really can work anywhere now, virtually. And that's a big advantage, I think, also to generate more flexibility in your organization, generate more women leadership as a result of that, diversity as a result of that. So all of this, I think, provides virtual worlds, social networks, use of this technology, shedding the bricks and mortars that we are currently, still using a lot as businesses. Huge, fantastic opportunities over the next increment of time, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely, and used responsibly, of course, and with trust.
And a micro comment, just look at what we've been able to achieve with telepresence here, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
It's a classic example of what Magda just said. We don't need everybody to fly, consume a lot of carbon and time to participate in an event like this.
Very carbon neutral, what we're doing here, absolutely. Now, talking about the bigger prospects, we've seen a lot of demonstrations as of late. You were referring to it as well. I was referring to the Arab Spring, the American Autumn. And here, one of the questions is the pushback against big industry seen in the US and the EU an emerging trend that will impact businesses? I mean, if you really have a mob of people somewhere in Manhattan going in front of private houses of big business people and demonstrating and wanting accountability and, wanting some sort of answers or changes, of course it will impact business. I mean, I'm answering a question. I mean, for me, it's somehow no-brainer, but the question is how? How quickly, how much, and how do you deal with it? Who would like to pick that up?
I think you deal with it by ensuring that in every single community that you serve, you have to have a meaningful role to create sustainability of those communities. You work to create more sustainable communities, and no matter then how big your business is, as long as it's local, as long as in every local community that the business operates in, the business can support local communities, not just its own business, but support local communities, help education, help sustainability in that local community, be an active member of that local community, then I think that is the answer, and businesses are going to flourish as a result of that. And if businesses don't do that, then they're going to suffer, and suffer measurably.
But Muta, this costs money. I mean, for me, any kind of corporate social responsibility in the short term, at least, does cost investment. You have to think about it, what you can do, you have to allocate assets to it, put it through, and then the actual positive comes out a long time, maybe after you've had the investment done. Perhaps now is not the moment where you can afford this. So how do you deal with that?
You deal with it because you don't see it as an expense, you see it as a benefit and as a part of your actual business. Okay. And then, because, see, we have a very simple view. Unless we can meaningfully help create sustainable communities, we know we are not going to have a sustainable business. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So it's not an expense anymore. It's an absolute mandatory must.
So if you think about what businesses really are good at, they're good at solving problems and leveraging opportunities. And so I think the first step on this is for business to realize that this is both a massive problem and a huge opportunity. The problem is that confidence in Western-style capitalism has collapsed post the crisis of 2008. But we also know that capitalism, for all its faults, has been a power in the world, has created wonderful opportunities for many people. It has a lot of downsides, there's no doubt about it. So we don't want to throw everything away with capitalism. So the opportunity is to create the better form of business, the more sustainable form of business. And I do think the world will cleave into those businesses that get it and will be able to navigate through the 5 trends in a way that benefits all their stakeholders, and the ones that don't. And, you know, I say that in an industry which is probably the poster child for some of the downsides of capitalism. And I believe in my industry that if the industry doesn't change, there are going to be winners and losers, because society will not tolerate the continued behavior that people perceive as being negative for society. And you already see that happening. Yeah. And for those of you in industries, it was quite interesting to hear the discussion on obesity. Look what's happened to the financial services industry post the crisis. And so if you don't react to get ahead of the curve, then society will ultimately impose sanctions upon you, as has happened in the financial services industry. Most people would argue rightly so. So I think there's a lot of lessons that can be taken across
society or the markets in general.
Or the markets.
A lot of
exactly.
pressure.
It's one and the same. So it's a big challenge. Yeah. But I also think it's a massive opportunity for those companies that can understand this and then execute.
I, of course, agree with what has been said, but, you know, you can't now separate this external issue, all the protests, the discussion you have external to your entreprise, and what you have in your company. It is rather the same now with your new employees. You have to discuss, you have to adapt your way of working, you have to change the habits, you have to invest more. When you want to attract young people now, you have to have sport facilities. You have to allow them to have a better, I would say, a better mix between private and work time. So it's rather the same debate, you know, external to the company or internal. Everything is changing. You have to invest. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a good investment. So don't be afraid of what is now outside of our company, because it is the same people sometimes who are working with you, and sometimes on weekend we are outside of the company, you know. So I would like to enlarge the debate, and we say that you have to invest a lot now in the company, either to discuss with third parties or to discuss with your own employees who want to change the way of working. And it is an investment, but in my mind, it's a positive investment.
Yes, and I think nurturing talent in general, this is also something that Gina, of course, was wanting to talk about. But this Generation Y that we are growing up with seems to be actually quite, you know, they consume a lot and they might be consuming jobs as well. So how do you actually retain them? One thing is you attract them. That might be in a war of talent quite difficult, because nowadays if I'm good, I can apply to Lenovo in China, I can apply to HP, I can apply to Microsoft, and at the moment, maybe the Chinese, not only maybe, they're already paying top dollars for the talent as well. So how do you A, attract, and B, but retain them so they won't hop?
I think back to the last question about the emerging mature. So I think answer the last question about Lenovo's way is a more balanced way. So because we develop from emerging country, so we always know how to develop emerging country, but we also learn how to develop a mature market. So now we know when the economy good, emerging, we can get some benefits. And if the economy is good in the U.S., we can get some benefits in the U.S. So always balanced way. And also in our business, we also have commercial business, consumer business. During the 2008, when the commercial business was bad, we can get some benefits from consumer side. Now, when the commercial business come better, then we can get some benefits here. So Lenovo is a very balanced company. And back to the topics, Generation Y. Mm-hmm. So first, we provide some product like a ThinkPad, a black, a very professional product for old, not professional or mature generation. But we also developed some creative tablet product and new some tablet notebook, like a pink color, red color for new generation. So we just develop a different product for different customers. But we also consider IT industry is a creative industry. We consider how to attract the best talent in Lenovo, not just in China, but also in India and also in America. So we did a lot of campus recruitment to hire the best engineer, best graduate student. So this is we want to use the fresh mind to create the best product, very fashionable and very stylish product for those kind of generation.
And Muja, again, I guess being proud of your company is a big thing. I mean, in a way, Coca-Cola almost missed the boat. I read a very interesting article, I think it was in the Harvard Business Review, where you said that Coca-Cola kind of was too inward-looking, didn't see what was going on, and then they were too American, didn't really know the being sensitive towards local changes or issues they needed to apply to. So how do you really make everybody, be it in India, in America, proud to be an employee of Coca-Cola? How do you, because that is, I guess, also part of retaining your talent.
It takes the same things to make consumers want to engage with your products. It's the same thing that you do that makes your employees proud, which is actually fusing the character of your company into what is expected by your employees and by your consumer base. That's basically, simply put, what you do. And that happens if you really actually put forward some very ambitious targets in sustainability and then go out and achieve them. And then start talking about them after you achieve them. So in our case, water neutrality as a target by 2020. In other words, imagine the amount of water that Coca-Cola consumes in the world, and then we said we're going to actually be water neutral. That means for every liter of water we take from the world, we'll give it back by 2020. No other, water user like us has been able to put forward that target, and we're ahead of our targets. In terms of carbon, grow your business, don't grow your carbon, and then you put metrics forward, and then you achieve them. That's what makes your employees proud. That's what makes consumers want to also engage with your brands. But it's really much more than that, because you have to embed all of that into your business philosophy, and then you actually become successful, as opposed to see it as an expense, as opposed to see it as a good word in a corporate social responsibility report. That's not how you achieve traction in that area. You achieve traction by actually putting forward targets, putting forward meaningful targets, and then making sure that you actually go out and achieve them.
Absolutely. Now we're starting to come towards the end of this session, so I'm going to go around the panelists with one last question. And Anthony, you said it earlier on, you can do everything in life, you just can't do it at the same time. So if you look at those mega trends that are the underlying business trends, which one is the most driving one right now, you would say, in your more medium term? And I will pose this question so the others can think about this as well. So what do you think, what is going to be driving your industry most, if you had to pick one?
Well, I think in essence, we're subject to all of them like everybody else. I can't pick one. But what I would say is there's the trends and what you do about them. And for me, the most important thing is building this notion of big leadership across business, government, and civil society so that we can address these long-term problems for the world.
Okay, Gina?
I think it's innovation. Because this innovation is a key for the IT industry, and we just want to be the innovative company to lead this IT industry.
Okay, John?
I would like to take two. War of talents, because we employ more than 200,000 people, and now more and more in emerging countries. That's very important for us. And the second one is social responsibility. We are now committed to be more involved in local communities in order to protect our business. So 2.
That's okay. Muta, do you have 3 now?
I would say just people. I think business is only as going to be as successful as the people. And we have an absolute target to be the #1 destination for the next generation of youth coming wanting employment. And if you can be successful there, being the #1 destination, then I think all the others will come.
People come first. I like that. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to Jérôme Thurlot, Jaideep Suez, Anthony Jenkins, Barclays, Muta Kent, Coca-Cola, Gina Kwa, of course, from Lenovo. Thank you for your participation with regards to the balloon. I hope we got a little bit of questions answered here. And stay around, no break for you. So I'll make it very quick because we now have the CEO champion session. What if we had to do even more to advance women in corporations? So men are welcome to stay as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.